All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Innovation Heroes, where we bring you innovation leaders from around the world to inspire your own innovation journey. My name is Adam Olson from HeroX, and as always, I have the pleasure of hosting the conversation today. I'm joined by someone I really enjoy talking to. She's a media entrepreneur with experience at companies such as Vice Media before she went on and founded her own social impact-driven company, Juniper Media. She's an incredible storyteller. You'll be able to see that immediately with how passionately she speaks about her work. Madeline Moitozo. So welcome, Madeline. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to getting your insights on storytelling innovation and how that's changed over the years. Before we get started, can you maybe dive a little bit deeper into Juniper Media and the journey that's led you to starting your own company?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. It's so awesome to have the time to chat. So Juniper Media collaborates intimately with global brands and organizations. We harness the power of journalistic storytelling to create media for social impact. So what that means is, we're helping to elevate social media presence, expand audiences, especially creating the awareness of issues that companies care about, with really a dynamic and collaborative approach. We are a team of journalists, so we all come from a journalistic background, and we have special expertise in crafting stories and content around everything from gender equality to veterans issues, immigration, climate change, social justice, and LGBTQ+ perspectives. And our work is made from soup to nuts through extensive research and casting, writing, digital production. We kind of run the gamut, so to speak.
That's awesome. And so tell me a little bit more about what led you to, starting such a social impact driven organization and kind of the journey you took to get there.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about social impact, I think I've always been somebody who's cared about what's happening in the world and social inequality. I was a journalist for 8 years, started with MSNBC. Then I became a associate producer on the early Today Show when I worked at Vice. But before that, my life was all in international development. I worked for a USAID in West Africa. I worked also for a small women's nonprofit in Ghana that did microfinance. And I, kind of ping-ponged back and forth between really wanting to make a difference in the media, not knowing how to do that exactly, going into the nonprofit realm, getting into communications. I just feel like in my 20s and early 30s, it was always like, what's the next step that I can do that will help me be someone who's empowered to make a difference in a community? And I think there was kind of a hodgepodge of what part of the industry or what industry I'm in that can help shape that. And between going back and forth between communications, journalism, and humanitarian issues, it ended up eventually evolving to Juniper.
So you were kind of like chasing almost a personal fulfillment, like you wanted to like really feel that your work was creating an impact.
Yeah, it's funny. Out of college, I was going to go to law school, and I was planning on going to law school, studying for the LSATs. And I took this, it was like a personal development course. It was a 3-day intensive course. And one of the things that I got out of it was it shed this light on the blind spot that I had, that I wasn't really doing that for quite the right reason. I think I was doing it because it felt safe and it looked really good on paper. And so my parents would have less anxiety about my future if I was in law school. But I had this flash, and it's going to sound so silly, but I flashed back to being a little kid, watching TV, and one of those public service announcements from the ad council came on that was about, I think it was about drug usage. And it was like, this is your brain on drugs. And it was the egg in the frying pan. I think anyone who
I remember those for sure.
Yeah, knows that. And I remember being really like moved by it, being like, that's so cool that you can watch something on TV that is impacting behavior or trying to make the world better. And so I'm 22, sitting in this personal development course in a bright room with neon lights and like 100 other people. And I just got really kind of reconnected to that. And so I stopped my law school applications. I started getting in action, just trying to figure out what could I do in that realm. It felt very confronting because I just spent 4 years on education that had absolutely nothing to do with media. And I had no production skills, and I had no real skills at all as a college student. But I had a friend who lived in LA, and she was working in TV. And I said, do you think you could help me get on a show down there? And she did. She got me a job as a production assistant on, it was a show that only lasted one season. It was a reality show or a game show with Tucker Carlson as the host. He was wearing a bow tie, and it was called Do You Trust Me? I don't even know if it actually made it to air. It was maybe just the pilot season I worked on. But it was kind of the prisoner's dilemma of bringing two strangers together, and do they trust each other to move forward to kind of win a big sum of money? And I worked on that show, and then the writer's strike happened in 2008, which was a massive hit to LA. So all scripted, mostly interesting content in LA stopped, and it was only reality shows and game shows. So from there, I became a production assistant on the revival of American Gladiators. And that was a fascinating experience. I actually still
Yeah, I
have
bet.
friends from that. I mean, it was such a, I want to say, traumatizing and also bonding experience that I still have friends from that show. But yeah, I learned a lot about production. And from there, I mean, the story is long and convoluted, but from there, I ended up going to DC and wanting to work in more meaningful content like Discovery or Nat Geo. I worked for the World Bank for a little bit. Also, it was not a great time to be a young person. It was the recession hit, so just trying to find a job that was really hard. And I feel like my early 20s really just taught me how to be scrappy and take all the actions you need to take to make sure that you don't have to move back home with your parents. You know, so waiting tables, working at a temp firm. I hosted bar trivia at one point. But my motivation, I think, all the way through was like, how do I do something that can help make the world a better place?
Well, you and I have that in common. I too have also hosted some bar trivia a time or two before. I worked in the bar industry for ages. So, that's something I feel like, built my character for sure. You learn a lot in the service industry. But I found this super cool. Like, sitting in your law class with a lot of other people that are, very focused on the route they're going. You think back to something as in your childhood that sparks that fire within you to really chase your passion. I feel like a lot of my friends that I know that are lawyers now or in law school, they all say, don't do it. Like
100%. My professors had said that to me because I was a legal studies major and I interviewed all of them about what to do. And everyone was like, I mean, you can do it, but none of them were very happy doing it. And I was like, wow, I mean, and I do have friends who are public defenders and work in human rights stuff, and that's their passion. And I have so much admiration for them. But yeah, in general, I would say most folks I've talked to said don't do it. So
yeah. Well, it sounds like you probably learned a lot more and gained more valuable experience having to be scrappy during those difficult times. Like you were really going through it.
Yeah, 100%. It built character and also just made me really resilient. I think now when I face setbacks, I bounce back so much quicker because of my experience in my 20s and kind of learning how to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And, the fantastic result of building a cool company that's working on some really interesting projects. So on that note, are there any, campaigns that you've worked on recently that are worth highlighting? I know you've shared a few with me that I've found really inspirational.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the really one of the first campaigns we worked on was for a campaign for Lyft, the rideshare, and they wanted to do something in response to Trump's suspension of the travel and immigration from Muslim countries, Muslim bans, we call it. And they tasked a production company out of San Francisco called Even Odd, and a friend of mine from high school ran that company, and so he reached out to me to tap us for Storyfinding. And one of the cool things about that was I got to fly out to Dearborn, Michigan, which is the largest concentration of Muslims here in the US. And I spent 4 days. Yeah, it's a massive concentration of Muslim people. And I got to spend 4 days interviewing Lyft drivers who are Muslim about their experience as people working in the gig economy, as well as leaders of mosques, and really getting this perspective of like, what is the value of these incredible people who are flying from all over and immigrating from all over to be here and start lives here. And so the idea was that immigrants are vital to our economy, and especially the gig economy, and and to understand the world more from their view and more from that view, given the political landscape was quite hostile.
And what kind of? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so that I have another campaign to share about, but if you had a follow up about that.
Yeah, I was just like, so love the campaign. That was like, I was kind of following along when all that stuff was happening. So it was something I was relatively interested in. But did you get to see any results that came from the campaign? Like, did you find like it really hit home with a lot of people? Did it make the situation better?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. The production company could. I've seen the website. What they've done is incredible, but I don't, because we're the kind of production side of it, we don't deal with the metrics. But I mean, it's one of my favorite things to share. And did stuff in that campaign, not just for Muslims, they did it on other immigrants too, and on Hispanic Americans, on people from Mexico or other countries. So yeah.
And what kind of things were they saying, like when you were interviewing them? Like, were they having a really tough time on a day-to-day basis with their customers?
Well, I think part of the challenge really is building that trust and sense of safety, because by nature, a lot of people who are immigrating from those countries are super suspicious and don't trust most Americans who are not from their community because they've been poorly treated or because of the stigma they've experienced. But a lot of these people are incredible. I mean, one of the people I interviewed actually ended up being now my current best friend. I was
Oh,
like
wow.
to her wedding. Yeah. She worked for a mosque. She invited me to come stay with her family. I ended up not having a place to stay, and she had me come stay with her family, and her mom's like my surrogate mom now.
Wow.
But really just, I was so let into that community. I mean, they let me in, to their mosque service to, be able to kind of understand their culture. And they
Mm,
want people to understand who they really are. And they want to have a chance to say, this is who we are, not just this thing that we're seeing in the media. We're not all terrorists. We don't have
yeah.
this American value. And really a lot of the people who are driving Lyft and other ride shares, obviously they're just people trying to make a living. And
Mm,
I mean, I got to learn really interesting things like, a lot of Muslim people, it's in the Quran that you don't touch dogs or have dogs. It's like part of the religious belief. So like you can't have a dog that's not a service dog in an Uber, and understanding why that's important.
mm.
You
Wow, I
know,
didn't know that.
yeah, at least
Yeah.
in Dearborn, Michigan, not necessarily in other parts of the country, but um, also just like hearing their immigrant stories. Like I just hear a lot about what people have been through and what it's
Mm,
taken them to get to this country and rebuild their lives. And a lot of them are refugees.
yeah, it's incredible, some of the stories.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing about what they've had to endure and overcome and rebuild is so moving. And I
Mm,
mean, it's a practice that I have even when I'm not working. Anytime I'm in an Uber, I ask where somebody's from and I talk
mm,
about there. And I've been to some of the countries like Bangladesh. So if I have a Bangladeshi driver and I say they get so excited, right? They want to
yeah.
share. People want to share their stories if they feel like they're actually being heard. You know,
Mhm.
so I think that was an important thing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure as well you have a nag for getting stories out of people. So, whether you're on the clock or not, I'm sure, you do a good job of having those conversations and making them feel heard.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing for our team because you do really fall in love with people
Hmm.
and getting to tell their stories and give a platform to voice,
Hmm.
the voices that don't often have that opportunity to speak up is really special. And, some of our stories have been on the air during the Oscars, the Super Bowl,
Oh,
and it
wow.
moves me to, yeah, it really moves me to be able to know that those voices are getting that kind of attention and um, reverence. So yeah, that's been
Yeah,
amazing.
that's incredible. Those are some of the biggest stages you can be on for advertising.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're on a timeline. Is it okay if I share this other campaign that I wanted to talk
Yeah.
about? Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
please do.
Another a campaign that we worked on just this year was with Indeed, and
Hmm.
they're a job search platform, and are global. They're a global job search platform, and they have a real commitment to ending stigma around people who are formerly incarcerated and
Hmm.
creating a more fair and equitable landscape for employers to hire these folks. So we spent 2 months just interviewing people who'd spent years in prison. Some of them as young people, under 18, some of them spent 20 or 30 years in prison for a wide variety
Wow.
of offenses. A lot of them, we did a big focus on marijuana charges just this last month. And being able to hear their stories and what people go through both in prison and then what they face out of prison is um, it's profound what they go
Hmm.
through. And a lot of companies, we are seeing more companies creating fair chance policies, but the majority of companies don't have that.
Yeah.
And Indeed's goal is to really help change minds and hearts of employers and hiring managers to give people a chance.
Yeah.
Um, and there's so much evidence that it's not only good for the individual, but it's good for the economy.
Hmm.
There's millions of people in America who have some kind of criminal background. And the best thing that we can do is give them a chance to have a job so that they don't end up being back in prison or falling into illicit ways of making income. And so the first part of this campaign was debuted at a really big HR conference in New York in September. And we
Hmm.
got to take 8 of the people that we interviewed and blow their portraits up to like 10 feet tall and
Cool.
put a QR code on that portrait. So you go up as you walk up, you'll see like a saying underneath that says, "I am not my blank." And then where the blank is, there's a QR code. So like, I am not my record. I am not my past. And then
Hmm.
you scan the QR code and it opens this video and you get to literally have this like intimate moment with this person who's sharing
Wow.
who they are, what they can do, what they're passionate about,
Hmm.
what their skills are. It's kind of almost like an elevator pitch for you to hire them.
Yeah.
And so all these HR managers got to view these videos. One of the people that we featured for that campaign ended up getting a job on Indeed about 2 months later
No way.
after
That's
not being
awesome.
employed for 6 years.
Wow. So
Yeah.
that's incredible to be able to see like the immediate effects just like that. And like thinking about it, like I've met a lot of incredible people that have rocky pasts, and a lot of the systems, they don't do a fantastic job of like rehabilitation. I feel like we're
They do a
getting
terrible
better.
job. They do a terrible, terrible job. You are
I
being nice,
don't.
you're being very Canadian about that.
Yeah. Part of who I am, I suppose. But yes,
Yeah.
like especially when you start comparing it to, like European incarceration systems and
Yeah.
things like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, where the emphasis still seems to be, whether they do a good job of it or not, is kind of on that, like, oh, well, we need to like make the prisoners or these people better, educate them, rehabilitate them, get them back into society. But like, if you're not putting the emphasis on, educating and supporting the hiring managers to give them the opportunities, you're going to land pretty flat. So like, am I understanding it right, that seems to be the real main focus for this campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. This campaign was really focused on the difference we can make with hiring managers, employers, and companies.
Mm,
The system is not set up for people to win.
yeah.
And really this goes into the value of Juniper as well, is that what we're seeing is just that people are not treated like people.
Yeah.
They're treated like a number, they're treated like a commodity. Often there's what's the word? They're treated like opportunities for corporates to profit off of them. And while I think that there are companies, and I'm gonna pause. I was gonna say about something about Indeed working on policy, but they're not really there yet, so you can cut that part out. Yeah, so this campaign really focuses on how can we give props and applause to companies that are doing this, that are making these changes. Ben and Jerry's is a great one. Starbucks also hires formerly incarcerated folks. Dave's Killer Bread is founded by a formerly incarcerated person.
Oh, cool.
But also, how can we have conversations that help shift the narrative or the concerns or alleviate fears, right? Because it really is all about fear. I think that people are afraid to trust or hire, or what's the risk versus the benefit of hiring somebody with a record.
Yeah, 100%. You really want to try to give these hiring managers the confidence that, they're going to be like, if they are going to take the chance on someone like this, it's not going to be, or it's going to go well.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. No, I think that's I love the campaign. I love like interactive campaigns, with that QR code, get them engaged. Like it's like captivating. And I think that's a great kind of transition to start chatting about, the innovation we don't typically think about in storytelling or media, because it's not like a tangible product, or there's not like R&D behind those kind of things. But I know like that's a perfect example of the kind of innovative approach you and your company take to storytelling. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on how that's changed over the years. I obviously see people wanting to interact with brands and organizations a lot differently. Yeah, like what have you seen? You've been in media or different parts of media for a number of years.
Yeah, I think the biggest change is it's been motivated by the fact that consumers are increasingly more conscious and thoughtful about how they spend their money and the impact of how they spend it.
Yeah.
When you think about commercials of my youth, at least, I grew up in the 90s, compared to now, they've changed a lot, right? I think that people require more trust and are more sensitive to being sold, misled, tricked. So companies are really seeing the value and needing to step up when it comes to being real, putting their money where their mouth is, being transparent about their values. I also think politics have played a major role in this. I joke that like the best thing that came out of Trump's presidency was that it has forced companies to be more transparent and take a stand on their values. And
why do you say that? Like what about the presidency kind of forced that?
Perfect example. Roe v. Wade being overturned.
Yeah.
He wasn't president when that happened, but he obviously stopped the court or the Supreme Court changed during his presidency. So when Roe v. Wade was overturned, you're seeing Twitter and Lyft and all these other companies become much more transparent, saying we're going to help people with reproductive health care. Right. Also, Black Lives Matter. When George Floyd passed away and that movement erupted, you saw companies not only saying we stand with Black Lives Matter, but calling themselves out and saying, you know what, our leadership isn't diverse, and here's the things we're going to do to make that diverse, because we know that people care about this. Climate change, right? And now climate change obviously isn't relevant just to when Trump is in office. It's been happening for a while and it's getting worse all the time. But I think you're seeing more companies say, you know, we're putting our money towards this, or here's what we're doing about this, or fast fashion. You see more companies being willing to say, we're going to raise our prices a little bit and invest in this kind of fabric, or we're fair trade, or you know, and unfortunately, some of them are kind of doing it in a fake way. I think H&M is an example. They've tried to do this like green conscious label that's, I think, completely rubbish.
And then it almost does the exact opposite of what they're trying to do.
Right. Well, anything that's fast fashion is, yeah. I mean, I could talk for a long time about this, but fun facts. So a lot of secondhand clothes from the US and developed countries goes to developing countries like in Africa and Latin America. And there used to be a really big commercial value to that. They could resell those clothes. Because fast fashion has gotten so big and because the quality of clothing has become so poor, a lot of the clothing that's now going over there is literally not resellable because the quality diminishes so quickly. So now what's happening is before those clothes were getting pushed over thrift store quality clothes to be resold, they're now just sitting in landfills in Africa because we can't resell those clothing.
Yeah.
So yes, it's like, you know, consumerism is more conscious, but also there's companies that are doing it well and doing it correctly with integrity. There are companies that are not.
Yeah.
And I think people care about that more. And I think we need to be having more conversations about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it is really, you certainly are seeing a lot more brands kind of, you know, opening up their doors to, you know, their internal structure and their values and kind of showing everyone behind the curtains.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the most important part about it is them being willing to say, we're not doing this well and we want to do it better. Here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We don't need people, you know, we don't need companies saying, here's how great and wonderful we are and we're amazing. That's good if they can back it up. But it's also, where are we growing? How can we tell one on ourselves to show our values and say, this is our commitment moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, that kind of translates pretty well into, you know, the space that we work in with crowdsourcing and open innovation, because, you know, when an organization does want to become a little bit more transparent and, you know, announce what they're working on or what their goals are, especially in the sustainability or environmental world, we see it a lot. Not only do they want to be transparent and open up their doors, but they want to ask for help. You know, that's what, and they'll run a prize challenge and will crowdsource people around these goals and issues. I feel like every company has to have a big, ambitious sustainability goal, you know, be net zero by 2030 or whatever. And then all of a sudden 2030 is just around the corner and they turn to the crowd to try to solve those problems. But I just think in general, the transparency, the openness, that to me seems like one of the biggest shifts like in the past 10 years with organizations.
100%. And I think it's amazing. I think it's incredible. I am so happy this is happening. I agree with what's amazing about the crowdsourcing too, is like, it's kind of similar in the way to us doing real people casting, right? There's so many amazing stories out there. There's so many amazing ideas out there. And what you're able to do to cast that net and say, we're collecting the best of the best. And use that. I mean, you're giving access to people who maybe don't have access to share their ideas, to share their visions, to share their, you know, and because you guys do it in a global way, I've seen some of your competitions and there's people from like every country who have access to this, you know. I thought there was one person I saw that won from some developing country, and I was thinking like, what $30,000 does in Mali versus New Jersey is a completely different world. So that's amazing that you get to do that as well.
Yeah. And if you ever like listen to our CEO, Cal, speak on podcasts or anything, she's Indian. And so she's very passionate about, you know, giving that equal opportunity to compete and work. And that's what the platform's all about. And, you know, incredible solutions and innovations come from these places. And, you know, we've had multiple people from developing countries win some really big challenges and, you know, start companies from it. And it is really inspiring to see. You know, I've always kind of thought like that a prize challenge would be an interesting or an impactful kind of marketing tool for an organization. Like we haven't really seen it used that frequently. Like Lululemon did one with us a little while ago where, you know, they were looking for just like some innovations around how they could use their storefronts for physical activities like yoga classes or whatever.
Yeah, and I remember when I started doing that.
Yeah. And so they went to the crowd and were like, we want your feedback on how we can start to do it. But what they really wanted was to engage their customers and make them feel heard and involved in the decision-making process. So at the end of the day, I'm sure they probably could have thought of some things internally if they wanted to, but in doing this, it was a great kind of engaging, interactive marketing branding campaign to engage their customers.
Yeah. And I love the idea that like, you have no idea where the best idea is going to come from.
Yeah.
You know, it's very similar to what we do. I have no idea where the best story is going to come from. You know,
So typically, like when you say that, like, you know, when I think of a prize challenge, you know, where we reach, you know, hundreds of people. Obviously, for every campaign you do, you can't interview hundreds of people. What is your typical sample size when you're kind of going out for, let's say, this Indeed campaign or the Lyft one?
the Fair Chance one that we did, I think we had a total of, we got responses from hundreds of people.
Okay.
And I think we ended up narrowing down to 35 people that we focused our interviews on. And then from that, we selected a top 8.
Okay.
Yeah, some of these campaigns though. So one of the things that we do that's unique, I think, to our organization is something called Storybanks. So if a client comes to us and they say, we really want to build this kind of archive or this database of stories that we can pull from over time, that's something that we offer. We do that for 2 reasons. One, we're not just charging you for a story. We're saying you own these stories. You can use them in 2 years, or your internal team can do them, or we can produce them. So because depending on the size, the story bank will have their photo, the summary, the link to their initial Zoom interview, so you get a sense of them on camera, notes about how we would rate them, or advice on how we would say, this story is really great for editorial, but maybe not on camera. This one's actually better for video, but maybe not editorial. And so we do that over time. So some of the companies we work with, I think they now have 150 stories in a database for a specific ask. And they can use those over time. You know, some of the stories might be specific to the service. Maybe they want to highlight the impacts of their service or product on a person. And so we'll have 150 stories just about that, right? About that they can use over time. Some of them are more niche, or depending on the time of year, maybe it's for a Pride campaign, for example. We do just Pride stories, or we could do just something for, we've done stuff for veterans, about veterans and their lives. So depending on how much time we have, right? Sometimes for the story banks for clients, if they have us on contract for a year, we're updating that story bank over the year.
Okay.
If it's a shorter campaign and we need it for just a specific ask, like the Fair Chance hiring, we'll have, 20 to 30 ones that we feel are strong and good that we select.
So I feel like that's a big differentiator probably within the industry, because we're like providing all these files and these assets to companies. I feel like a lot of, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but in my view, media companies, or you hire them to produce an asset and they keep all of the files and they just produce that one product. Yeah,
that's, I think in a way we're kind of, I don't know if it's not profit based. We're not like typical agency in that way. We're not really here to hoard the information and keep it to ourselves. You as a client would own that, and because it's for you, right? We are, yes, we're a company, but we're here for a mission. We want to do the most good that we can with the skills and the resources that we have. So if it's going to be beneficial for you to keep those stories, please keep them so that you can use them over time. And also, I say we're very much most PR or creative agencies, I think, are very much deliverable. You're paying us for the deliverables. You are obviously doing that with us, but we are story first. So we're really interested in how can we get the story the most exposure, or how can we get the heart of the story the most. So if you want to take a story and use it for different purposes, or have us use it for different purposes, we want that. I don't know if that makes me like a bad business owner, or but I don't know. I guess I am very heart driven in the company, and we have found ourselves to be successful that way. So I don't think we have to do it the way it's been done.
No, I think that will directly relate or translate into customer satisfaction, and that always comes full circle. So if you're putting that customer first, and it sounds like you're kind of taking that same approach of organizations being more transparent and open. You're like, here's everything, here you go. Like, if you're going to do it, I'm going to do it, and I can't see that not hitting home with customers.
Well, that's true. It really is what it comes down to. Is we also have to obviously live our mission and values. We are not just here for the companies to do that, but we hold those values ourselves.
And so, like, are you turning down work if a company approaches you and doesn't really have a project or a campaign in mind that doesn't quite land with your mission and values that you're trying to achieve?
We haven't turned a company down for a project, but we have turned a company down because we couldn't get behind them ethically.
Right.
And the sad thing was, the project they wanted to do was great. But
But it was just,
there was some of their values and ways that they had showed up in the world that we couldn't get behind, unfortunately. And I think that's okay, you know.
I think that's great.
Yeah, and there's other great firms out there that don't have that qualifier, but we are political in that way, you know. And if they want to come to us and talk about how can we be a better company and how can we stop doing the things that we were doing that gave us the crappy reputation, then great, come to us and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, you have to say it's not quite a match, and we back you in finding the people who can help you tell the stories.
Yeah, well, I think that's important, you know, to have that integrity for yourself and for the organization. You know, even for us being a crowdsourcing platform, and we pride ourselves on, you know, being a place or a platform for anybody and everybody to host or compete in a challenge. You know, there certainly are some projects that come our way that we're just like, you know, I don't think that ethically makes sense. Like that we're not really, that doesn't align with what we're trying to do. And I think the organizations that don't hold themselves to those kind of standards, you know, I just think it just takes away from their integrity.
Well, and honestly, from my perspective, it's dangerous, because if you are a company that's doing something shady, and then you want to do a campaign that says we're great and wonderful, we're doing all these things, you're hurting the cause of what we're actually doing.
Yeah. It kind of like makes discredits your other work a little bit, almost. Yeah, I can see that. So I love the openness that your company takes, and, you know, providing not just the finished asset. Would you say that's kind of your secret sauce? Like, I know, like, to your storytelling, is there something more that you really feel like you're doing differently?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's definitely part of it. I think as journalists, for us, it's really about what's going to move the needle forward and also connect with the viewers to the heart of the story. So, you know, we know how to dig for those rare bright spots as journalists. Everyone has a story to tell that can move you. And I think over the years, my team and I have really learned how to ask the right questions and create trust with the subject to have them feel safe opening up, because a lot of these stories are really personal. And that's, I think, where the gems are a lot of the time. But I think it is really because we are unique, and that we are completely journalistic in our ethos, but also we are all journalists. The other thing I will say, and this doesn't have to do with storytelling, but just how we run the company, is part of the motivation for me starting this company is that I was a freelance journalist for a time before I started this. And I know how financially difficult it is to stay in that industry. And if I can provide journalists the opportunity to come on and do these contracts while still pursuing their passions on the side, or taking time off to pursue a story, I want to do that, because that's what I wanted. And that's honestly the first contract that I got doing research before I started this company enabled me to keep doing journalism.
Wow.
So in a way, you know, there is an altruistic angle in that element as well, and that we're supporting journalists, we're keeping them thriving, we're keeping them paying their rent and roofs over their head while they report those stories, and then they can come do this incredible work. And when the contract's done, go back to doing what they're doing. And so that is really important. And I truly believe that if people are doing what they love, they will thrive. You know, I recently had someone working with me who was doing a role within Juniper that they were good at, but I could just kind of intuitively sense that they didn't love that exact part of it. And we made a little shift, and I said, well, if you could do anything here, what would you do? And she told me, and I was like, I would love that. You know, so really enabling people to do what they love and shine in the ways that they feel like they want to shine, I think ends up with the best result for everybody. And it wasn't something I would have thought of. So
it's so true, because, you know, if you're kind of in a position where you're not just really loving what you're doing, it drains you more than anything. And that's something we're huge at HeroX. You know, we call it unique abilities. Like, if you're not operating in your unique ability, where it's kind of that intersection of what you love doing and what you're good at, so you're feeling fulfilled, you know, you're not going to be operating at your best. And so chances are
often affects usually the bottom line on some level, right? Usually the work you're producing isn't the best quality work, or the things you're attracting aren't always the best quality. So, I mean, it's both ways. Obviously there's an interest for me in it too, but I think everyone does win when you can create that space.
100%. And chances are, you know, if there is something that isn't really hitting home for you, and if your team is structured right, chances are there's probably going to be someone that really enjoys doing that, and it's better off on their plate anyways, because they're going to do it better. That's sort of how I ended up hosting this podcast. You know, I love talking to people that have these conversations. So I was like, all right, perfect. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And my job's kind of changed over time, but love what I'm doing now.
It's awesome.
Perfect. I know we're getting a little bit close to time. I'm happy just going a little bit over if
Sure.
we're having a good chat. But we've spoke about how things have changed drastically over the past 10 years in storytelling and how brands are opening up. But with all this crazy technology that's on the horizon right now for us, I feel like the next 5 to 10 years are probably going to be even crazier. Are you seeing any big shifts already? Do you predict anything? Like I'm looking at all this AI coming out, and I don't even need to host the podcast anymore. I'll be able to, there's
You'll
AI
get the
people
top version of yourself, and
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we will be seeing more of this. I just saw on Instagram, Christian Dior did an Instagram post that was like a documentary style thing.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, it was like an interview with, I think, one of the people in their leadership. I do think we're going to be seeing more and more of a demand for what's behind the scenes, what's behind the curtain, pulling back the veil.
Yeah.
I think that as humanity is going to have to adapt to the way the world's changing.
For sure.
I mean, it's so easy to get down on the way things are. I mean, here in the US with everything from mass shootings to protests to, there's a lot going on that feels very scary and unsafe. And I think that you will continue to see companies choosing to be more open and vocal about being part of shaping policy and shaping the political landscape of this country. I think that you will see environmentalism and climate change and net zero becoming more and more important.
It's a must.
Yeah. I think that, my dream, my hope is, especially when it comes to, as someone who used to work in the global South and developing countries, we are going to see more of a humanitarian view of people in other places. It's like one of my biggest things is I hate when I hear people talk about, othering, right? Othering people because they're less educated or they have a color of skin or they're from this background, or I'm hoping that we can do more work to decrease that gap.
Yeah.
And see that, all people have the same inherent value.
Right.
And that all people can be treated with dignity. This goes back to the mass incarceration, right? That can be treated with dignity, that we can end some of these policies and regulations that have people be oppressed here in the US. I think it's going to get intense. I do. It's intense now, right? But it's getting more and more intense. And I think that
I certainly agree. I think, as political and social issues become bigger and more intense, like the people's standpoints and views on them are going to follow suit. But I think that just speaks to the heightened importance of what you do, right? Really doing a good job for your customers and for these brands and organizations, and like selling their story or telling their story.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And personal vision for Juniper is that we continue to grow and attract more folks. We've been so privileged and lucky to work with incredible brands, Fujifilm and the Pill Club, and Indeed has been with us for quite a while. We really look forward to growing and attracting more folks who are aligned with us and who are ready to get behind it and say, we want to be a part of this.
Well, I'm very excited to follow along and see the exciting projects that come up down the road for yourself and Juniper. I think that's probably a good spot for us to finish up. Because we are unfortunately at time. I probably could have chatted for another hour or so, but we got the time limit. But no, thank you so much for joining me today. I always enjoy speaking with you, and the highlights of the campaigns you've been working on are really inspiring, and I hope that the listeners get some inspiration from them as well.
Thank you so much. Same to you. What you guys do is so important. I think there's such parallels between our companies and the crowdsourcing you guys do, and you're also working hard to make the world a more innovative and better place. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that. Maybe someday we'll do a collaborative campaign. Let's get someone to do a crowdsource a crowd around.
I'm down.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Amazing. Well, I appreciate everyone who's tuning in with Madeline and I. If you're looking for some support to tell your brand story, or would just like to follow along the work that Juniper Media does, You can connect with Madeline on LinkedIn or directly on the company page. As always, you're able to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Again, my name is Adam Olson, or you can shoot us an email at possibilities@herox.com. Thank you for being part of the solution and have a fantastic day.